Yes, ma'am. So, before I hand you over to today's surprise guest, I would like to tell you a little bit about him. Some say that he's a results-driven professional with over 15 years of experience developing people and implementing business strategies. Some say he offers individuals and organizations the ability to learn how to improve operations by leveraging their people. Some say he's worked for Evergy and the Kellogg Company. And some say that since November 2022, he's been working at Paradigm Human Performance and in May became the Chief Operating Officer. Some say he's the stick. And all I know is that he's an expert on human error. And today he's going to be talking to us about the causes of human error and how to mitigate its side effects. RJ, over to you.
Well, thank you. Some would say that that introduction may or may not be factual, and I'll let the audience decide what is or isn't factual.
I
But
think
the
you
one
are
thing that
doing
is factual, yeah, is that I am definitely an expert in human error because I do it a lot. I have a lot of practice with it, and I think all of us are. So today I really appreciate Paradigm um, asking me to be the the speaker for the webinar, I guess today. Um, but really, I wanted this to be more of an interaction um, and really have a discussion around human error. I think that human error is uh, it's interesting in this world of human and organizational performance. It's probably one of the most interesting subjects within HOP because I think it gets misunderstood so much. So I'll start by just kind of telling you guys my journey of learning about human error, and then towards the end we can just have a discussion around it. If you guys have any questions or a specific topic around human error that you want to discuss, then we can just chat. But really, human error in my personal journey started to come to the forefront of my mind when I started in the electric utility world. So I started in the electric utility world about 9 years ago, and I found myself as the operations manager for a group of union linemen. And actually, a group, there's more like 5 groups. And here I am responsible for their safety, their well-being, getting them all the tools they need. And yet I knew nothing about the work they did. I knew nothing about the work environment they worked in. I knew nothing about their union contract, what I could and couldn't hold them to. I was I was kind of thrown into the deep end of a pool and didn't know how to swim. So found myself really sinking um, very quickly. And the way I knew how to lead people, or my past experience of leading people, was to just tell them what to do. And in the world of high hazard work, that scared me um, because I didn't know what to tell them. I didn't know how to tell them to do something that kept them safe. And so my journey really started in um, well, my first kind of epiphany was when I was able to witness some bare hand crews, some transmission line crews that actually do live energized work on extremely high voltage transmission lines. So they only do work on 128,000 volts and above. But they do it without any insulation protection. So they actually bond on, it's all energized. And what I witnessed those crews doing was I witnessed them using a specific methodology on how to approach a task. Right. So in my past experience, it was if you are going to approach a task and it's highly critical and we can't make a mistake, then you have to do this task step by step by step by step by step. And so that in my mind was really teaching people what to think or what to do. But when I watched these bare hand crews approach their work and execute their work, I saw that they weren't structured in what to do, but they were structured in how to think about their work. Right. And so really the shift was I needed to teach my people not what to think, but rather how to think about their work, to reduce that error and the likelihood of mistakes. And so I kind of shifted a little bit. I had a little bit of a paradigm shift when I was thinking about, okay, people can't make a mistake out in the field because they're going to get hurt. I started thinking, no, we really just need to teach them to approach the work a little differently. Um, and then as I really started diving into human and organizational performance, I learned about this System 1 and System 2 thinking. I'm sure we've all heard of it or read Daniel Kahneman's book on thinking fast and slow, and that really freaked me out um, because I realized that as humans, as we do a task, um, the more often we do a task, the better and more efficient we get at doing that task and completing that task. And that was my experience when I worked for the Kellogg's company. I would I was responsible. My first role with them, I was responsible for the product I sold from the time I put it in the door to the time it went out the door. So if it was stale or bad or whatever, I had to touch it. So I would order, for a big sale or something like that, I would order 1,000 cases of product for one store. And my job was to touch every single case. So I had to learn and adapt and build systems of efficiency. And when I first started, 1,000 cases might take me 6 hours to put up. But after the 5 years, at the end of the 5 years in that role, I could put up 1,000 cases in 2 hours because my brain was getting more efficient. It was adapting and it was building systems of efficiency, uh, it down to how quickly I could tear open a package and get the product on the shelf. Um, that was so adaptive. And so when I read Kahneman and I realized that our brains are constantly adapting and are constantly trying to be more efficient, I had another freak out moment because then I was thinking about my linemen, and I remembered watching apprentice linemen going up into the air and touching energized lines for the first time, and you watch them and they're very attentive and they're very focused and they are very, very cautious. And yet heard stories of linemen who were 20 years in, after sleep deprivation or on a storm, they could go up and they could do energized work and come back down and not even remember that they did the work. And so their brains were just so adaptive. Our brains, rather, are so adaptive at being more and more and more efficient every time we do a task that it kind of freaked me out when I thought about my veterans who had been in the craft for 20, 30 years, because the task that they did 15 years ago, they were zeroed in on, they were incredibly focused, and yet 20 years later, they could almost do it subconsciously. And so when I was studying System 1 and System 2 thinking, it really led me down this path of the correlation between efficiency and innovation and human error. And I really have come to the conclusion that human error, just in general, is actually a side effect of the efficiency and the adaptation of our brains and our system thinking. And so when we study human error, it's more about the study of what is causing the human to try to adapt or be efficient or innovative. Um, I hope that makes sense. I hope I'm talking in a series of thoughts that make sense to people. But um, so I would like to ask, does anybody here on the call have an example of a time where um, you were trying to be innovative and you messed that up and it totally blew up in your face, and you did something that you did not intend to do?
Probably.
Yeah.
I can't think of one now.
Go
Yeah,
on,
if you think
Anna.
of one.
No, okay, I
And
can't think of one, but yeah, almost certainly.
well, and it, a lot of us tend to think of like our work, right? And I like to relate these scenarios to my hobbies. So I have a couple of different hobbies, and one of my favorite hobbies is mountain biking, right? And so um, when I'm mountain biking, I'm constantly trying to go faster. I'm constantly trying to run routes and corners and jumps higher, faster, quicker. But there's been so many times when I've been trying to push the envelope and being faster on my mountain bike that I get out of control, right? I was reminded of this yesterday when I was on a bike ride with my daughter, and we were at the local dirt jump and little bike park in town, and I'm watching her ride these little rollers and these bumps and this little track, and she's super cautious, right? And she's going nice and slow, and she's barely making it over the hills, but she's not crashing. Right. But then as she got a little more confident because she could take the hills with a little bit of speed, and she pushes herself in a corner, she got a little sideways and she wrecked. Right. So she's innovating and she's kind of pushing the boundaries of her skills and ability, and then she makes the mistake. Right. Um, and I've found too that even when we make kind of not necessarily, it wouldn't be considered innovative mistakes. Like, how many of you have set something down like your keys or your phone, and 5 minutes later you forgot where it was? Right. um, One thing I've found through my personal life and personal observations is that when I'm doing that and I that happens to me, it's because I'm in a scenario where I'm trying to be really efficient with my time and my resources. I have something in my hand, and the last thought that goes through my head before I set that down is, oh, I'll set it here so I don't forget it when I need it. Right. I don't know if you guys have ever caught yourself thinking that, like, oh, I'll set it here. That way I'll remember where it's at. And then 10 minutes later, it's not where you normally put it. It's this new, really efficient place to put it. And you completely forget where you set it down.
We had a
That
guy
happened.
in, say we had a
Go
guy in
ahead.
this morning, and I took him out to see our a new piece of equipment that we've got, and he put his briefcase under our reception desk. Of course, did we go back into reception when he left? Had to come back
No.
half an hour later and get it.
Yeah. Yeah. And he was probably thinking, oh, I'll set it here. It'll be nice and safe. Right.
Yep, and I'll see
He's
it.
adapting to the situation. He's trying to be innovative about where he placed it. And yet it was outside of his normal routine. Right. And so his brain was trying to be efficient, but in that efficiency, it created an error trap.
Yeah.
Right. Um, and so I think that the biggest thing that I have concluded over the last 10 years of trying to study error in my personal life and then professionally with other organizations is that if we do not um, if we don't look at error as the side effect of adaptation and innovation, then we're kidding ourselves when we're building the systems of safety to protect against the consequences of error. And we have to, as organizations and as safety people and operations folks, look at error as the side effect, and just say, okay, this is going to happen because we want our people to be efficient and innovative. They are going to make mistakes. So how do we build a system as such that allows for those mistakes and allows them to make mistakes and efficiencies and innovations as safe as possible, with as many barriers between them and the mistake or the risk as organizationally possible. Does that make sense to folks? So how many of your organizations actually have that mindset that our people are going to make mistakes and we're just going to plan for it? Or how many of you have witnessed an organization that has that mindset? It may not be yours.
So my organization does have that mindset. It's the execution of what they intend is where there's a gap in the communication, right? There's not a complete and full understanding of the message a lot of the times. So that's where we really struggle as an organization. We have that mindset. People are going to make mistakes. Equipment's going to fail. How do we get to that point to where we're failing safe, right? And where the execution of that, like I said, through the consistent messaging, right? The intention's there, but there's the different levels of education and different levels of personal beliefs as far as risk thresholds are concerned. Those all play very heavily in the execution of that.
Yeah. And when you say, Donald, when you say risk thresholds, what do you mean by risk thresholds there?
So say, for example, it's a matter of perception, right? So the organization has an established threshold of risk that is what's acceptable in our organization. And obviously we drive that to be as minimal as possible. But every individual person, and this kind of leads into the human error side of it, everybody's individual perception of risk is different, right? What you may perceive as risky behavior, flying around on your mountain bike doing 60 mile an hour down the side of a mountain, and making that tight corner, you might do that with minimal protection, right? You might not have your helmet on. Whereas, my perception of risk is I can get on the back of my motorcycle and drive down the highway doing 80 mile an hour, in heavy traffic and not and be completely have my leather on, my jacket on, which has built-in padding, my helmet, all those other things. So my risk threshold is different than what yours is, right?
Yeah.
What
You're
I
a
perceive.
that guy, same as me.
So there's there's different perceptions of risk, and the challenge for us organizationally, even though we have established risk thresholds for every activity that we do, people perceive that differently. Right. So that's where the messaging and the communication is a challenge for us, organizationally speaking.
So the baseline is starting with critical or high risk tasks, and then saying, okay, this is the level of acceptable risk, and if you're outside this threshold, then what, right?
So that's when in being involved with with learning teams and things of that nature, we're constantly going through, for lack of a better way of explaining it, we're constantly doing maybe a process risk analysis. When we're trying to establish and bring everybody back into alignment. So, we may be here and we have a task that we have to achieve that is, maybe a mediumly critical, right? It's not necessarily a high risk activity, but it's still just a little bit out of our norm. What we would normally accept as a threshold. So, to try to bring people back into alignment from their individual beliefs of what's risky behavior, we have to have those conversations, right?
Yeah.
We have to have something tangible to try to bring things back into alignment.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Anna.
Now, I'm just thinking, because I mean, it was just got you talking about motorbikes that made me think of it. So I've recently done advanced motorcycling. And there's two fundamental things that you're taught on that. One is ride within the law. And the second bit is maintain your safety bubble. Everything else that you are taught on that comes into those two things. And mainly safety bubble, because you shouldn't ride outside the law, but if you have to momentarily to maintain, to stay safe, then you do it. But all the time you are constantly analyzing the risk, and sometimes it's going to be dead easy, and sometimes you're going through a city centre, you've got parked cars, you've got cars coming the other way, you've got junctions, but you're constantly splitting both sides that you're on and splitting the difference and maintaining that safety bubble. I'm just thinking how that relates to at work. It's a constant risk assessment.
It really is. And I think one of the things that brings me back to this innovation and adaptation conversation is, as your skill level builds, right, your confidence in your ability to navigate those hazards grows. Right. So Donald, like you were saying, like if I'm riding my mountain bike on a chairlift access trail and I'm just, doing 60 miles an hour and massive jumps and just going after it with no protection, helmet and skid pads and all that stuff, but I'm accomplishing the task without any crashes, right? Have I really exposed myself to risk based on my skill level?
Correct.
And I think that is what happens at work, right? A guy who has gone up and done hot work with live line electrical work for 15 years, has done it over and over and over, and has never had an incident, never had an accident, and never even, had a near miss. His confidence level and his skill and his ability grows. Therefore, what behavior that might be perceived as risky to you and I isn't risky to him, because he feels he has the confidence over the adaptation and innovation of the years, at least in his brain. Yeah, he feels that he has the skills and ability to handle that. And so I think when what happens at work is when we put blanket standards around risk exposure, we don't take into account for people who are going to be bored with adhering to this entry level risk exposure assessment or job hazard analysis, right?
Yep.
Because if I took somebody on a downhill mountain bike trail, if I took Claire, no offense, Claire, I don't know if you mountain bike at all, but
usually on my my head or on my back. Yes, I do.
If I said, "Hey, follow me," and I just went ripping off, she's going to be clutching the brakes. She's going to be super slow. If she makes it down, she's going to be like, what in the world did you expose me to? But if I take somebody else who's been, a professional, they're going to be tailgating me saying, come on, man, let's go. Let's get this work done. Right. They're going to be pushing me. And so I think we have that same thing happening at work, as we have experienced, masters at their craft who have taken these innovations and these adaptations over the 20, 30 years of their craft, and they're within the guidelines of acceptable risk associated with what the organization has said and built out that standard. You get a little bit of boredom. You get a little bit of, okay, it's monotony, it's mundane. And so because of the way our brains work, we're constantly wanting to push that envelope. And so you also have to take into consideration the skill level and the experience of your people when we're building out these standards of risk exposure. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And actually, that could go the other way as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, you take that experience and out of boredom, people can end up as well as being complacent.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it could go absolutely the other direction as well. And then, you have people that, are, as you stated, like you got that professional that's got that skill, and they're trying to push you, like going down the hill, say, come on, let's get this done. When you take and you put somebody in that position, especially if we're working with a greenhorn, so to speak, right? Somebody that's got a lower, a lower amount of knowledge, or their skills aren't as fully developed as the other individual. That person is driving forward as well, trying to prove themselves, right? So I mean, it's finding that balance.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Of keeping. So that's where critical thought comes. That critical thought, and that's what we try to teach. From even with our new hires coming in the door, we try to teach them to think critically, right? To be curious about what they're doing, and always trying to seek to understand what the process is, what the risks are, and what we do to build in factors of safety into that. Like I said, going back, then you get your senior people, or your people that are more skilled, have been their tenure's been there, they've been there for 15, 20 years in some cases, right? And their skills are there, and to try to reel them in, and it's just a kind of a fine line. There's a balance.
It really is.
That's what we struggle with.
Yeah. I think that, one of the things that really piqued my curiosity about this was when I see people doing extreme things at an extreme level, right? I was, I'm sure we're all familiar with the Rubik's Cube, right? And you watch people solve the Rubik's Cube incredibly fast. It's insane the speed with which people can solve a Rubik's Cube these days. I don't know if you, if I have kids, teenage kids, and so every once in a while I see these YouTube videos of kids solving them in like 3 seconds. And it's just like lightning fast. Their brains can process how to solve that silly thing super fast. But then that is a feat in and of itself. But then when you see people solving this cube in conjunction with an incredibly complex task like skydiving, it's this like, what is going on with the innovation and the, like, you see people like skydiving and they're solving a Rubik's Cube midair, and it's like, no. Normal people, our brains should be focused on one of those two tasks 100%, but the speed at which we're able to innovate and were able to adapt, I think has only been advanced, especially when we look at extreme things like mountain biking or motorcycling, because there are some basic fail safes that people have agreed to. Right. I don't know if I think the extreme sports example is one that's most tangible for me, just because I've seen the innovation in it. Extreme motorcycling, trick motorcycling, right? Freestyle motorcycling and dirt biking is one example. When I was in high school or in college in the late 90s, early 2000s, the innovation in that sport was ramped up tremendously because the bikes and the technology allowed people to do things on dirt bikes that nobody had ever done before. But people were getting hurt at a record pace, right? Every time they would try a new trick or try a double backflip or whatever, they would break a leg, break a wrist, and they would be out. And the true innovation came when people decided to build massive foam pits so that they could try these new tricks and fail and not break a leg or not break an ankle or a wrist. And then everybody was like, oh my gosh, we can do double backflips now because I can practice without smashing my face in the dirt when I mess up. But it was a pain because they had to get a crane and they had to lift the bike out of the pit and move it over because now you have a 300-pound dirt bike in a massive pit of foam. And then the innovation went to, okay, now our landing ramps are going to be inflatable landing ramps. And so it's more like the real world scenario. I can pick my bike up when I'm done, right? So the innovation that has allowed the human to do these amazing tricks and amazing feats of skill on a dirt bike has only been ramped up by the innovation in safety equipment, right? And the ability to fail safely. And that's, I think, what I'm trying to compare the workplace to is how do we build systems that allow the people to be as efficient and innovative as possible so that we can get it done faster, more productively, and for less cost, and yet still protect them and have a baseline of protection that's not handcuffing that innovation. Does that make sense? Michael, you have your hand up. Go, man.
Hey,
You can
thanks.
interrupt me at any time, Michael.
I'll lower my hand. No. I don't want to be impolite. Great vista, by the way, RJ. That's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you.
It's one of those like nouveau backgrounds that kind of move from time to time. Well done. It's very authentic.
No, those are live horses.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. Yeah, it's interesting to talk about innovation, and you're looking at this from a risk perspective. I'm not sure. Just a quick show of hands. How many of us are familiar with the bow tie model? No. Okay. I see a couple people say no. So just a quick explanation. So in risk modeling, there's okay. Paul's knows what he's knows about this. So thanks, Paul. There's a technique and a tool called the bow tie analysis, and this is typically for major accident hazards, material risks, and it's used extensively in oil and gas. I'm not sure about utilities. I imagine it would be utilities in mining as well. And so the name comes from looks like the bow tie, where the middle is the event, the top event, that's something that you're trying to avoid. And now I'm going to get my cameras mixed up here, so do bear with us. As I'm looking at it, on the left-hand side of the bow tie are all the threats or causes as to how this event could take place. And on the right-hand side is all of the consequences. What could happen if this event were to take place? And the idea is that you draw a threat line from the cause to the event and the event to the consequence, which you then lay on controls.
Yeah.
And you can go through the hierarchy of controls. So broadly speaking, on the left-hand side are preventative controls, i.e. preventing the event from taking place. And on the right-hand side, is the mitigating controls. So the event's taken place. Now we want to minimize the consequence of that. And so I think when we talk about innovation, we need to really focus on, well, where do we want to innovate, on what side of the bow tie, and and how much value are we getting out of this innovation, this R&D on the improvement of these controls from a usability standpoint, from an application standpoint. And I think it's really important. And let me give you the example I had that popped into my head. Two examples that popped into my head. One is from outside work and is kind of in this extreme sports. And then I'll link that back to a workplace example. So friend of mine who are skiers, one guy in particular, interestingly enough, he was from Brisbane and he was a huge skier. So, when he was in the Northern Hemisphere, he loved it. And he got a new jacket. Now, we were skiing together in Scotland, so we didn't necessarily need this particular piece of innovation. But he's like, oh yeah, I've got this embedded chip in my jacket. So if I ever get caught in a landslide, right? The opportunity to be able to hear the ping from my jacket would be greater, and I'd be rescued much sooner. And I said, that innovation's madness. That the likelihood, I said landslide, not avalanche, of course. The likelihood that you're going to survive an avalanche is vanishingly small, and the ability to find you through the ping in the jacket is increasing the chances of finding your body, not you alive. But this was something where he said, no, now I can, I'm happier to go off piste. I can, go to hills that I've never done before. He's thinking about doing heli skiing, etc. And I thought, it's interesting because it's the last control on the bow tie, on the very kind of right-hand side. And we're spending a lot of money on innovation for that, where the effect is going to be very, very low. Now, let me link that back to workplace from a mining standpoint. And I'm not sure how many of us have a lot of experience with the mining sector. But the mining sector is passionate about their mine rescue teams. So these are teams that are trained, they're especially remunerated, and they go to competitions. There is, particularly in North America, there are mine rescue Olympics, and it's really bizarre, I have to say, coming from a risk management standpoint, because again, that's innovating the beacon in my friend Dean's jacket. We're spending all this time and effort on mine rescue, kitting these guys out with all the latest gear, and to do what? Is to perhaps find bodies quicker, or in the horrific event that people are trapped underground in particular. What is the effect of this? And what I've always pushed back on that is, whenever there's a success in mine rescue, there's been a failure in risk management, right? So if these controls that are far down the right hand side of that bow tie diagram, if we're having to rely on those, we've missed the boat on all these other controls upstream. That was a long-winded story. I do apologize.
No,
it got me thinking based on what you're saying.
It's totally applicable too, because I saw that in the utility world. Right. One of the things that linemen pride themselves in is the lineman rodeos. Right. And they have lineman rodeos all over the country and all over the world, and they compete at showing off their skill. right? And the pinnacle of the lineman rodeo is conducting the hurt man rescue as quick as possible. Well, the hurt man rescue is a standard task that linemen have to go through. They climb up a pole. There's a dummy hanging from the pole from their fall restraint, and they have to lower the dummy to the ground as fast as possible. Well, it's just like you said, Michael. It's like, no. We've built a skill around an unmitigated risk, right? We've built a skill around assuming that we're failing to protect our people.
Yeah.
So why are we innovating and why are we practicing this skill in the world of failure instead of practicing and putting our efforts and our focus on preventing the contact that caused a lineman to be unconscious at the top of a pole in the first place?
Yeah, when
Does
we
that make
think about,
sense?
yeah, absolutely. When we think about controls,
Yeah.
your
And
budget is an expression of intent. So if
yeah,
you're budgeting all this resource for your lineman rodeo, your mine rescue Olympics, right?
yeah,
Your intent is saying we will tolerate the use of this. Right? We're
yeah,
actually
yeah,
not just tolerating it, we're celebrating the use of
yeah,
this.
yeah,
And that sends a big message across an organization in terms of, well, where's the budget for preventative controls
yeah,
and sound risk management? Yeah, I think it's a big cultural challenge, particularly in North America. Less so in the UK. Having worked in the UK, firefighters, they're feted all over the place. There's
yeah,
parades for them, right?
yeah.
But that is the last line of defense here.
Yeah.
I have
I'll
to
go on.
ask
I'll go
on
back on
the
mute.
Go ahead,
injured
Anna.
man rescue. Does that go? Is that a legacy thing from back when that would have been the?
Yeah,
It's just something that's just is, I suppose, like sort of Olympic Games that you just think, huh? How does that make sense to anything that we would actually do?
Yeah.
For javelin
yeah,
throwing, yeah, it made sense back, way back when you were fighting, with
Yeah. Is
yeah.
it the Roman
Spears and
Greco
yeah,
wrestling, basically,
yeah, yeah.
of mining? Is that what you're saying, Anna?
sorry.
Is it the Roman Greco wrestling of mining? Is that what you're saying?
Why not? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I certainly think there's a legacy to this, and because legislation typically is slow in modernizing, there's a lot of legislation I know here in Ontario and state to state in the United States, where there
yeah,
is a requirement for mine rescue. You have to have a certain number of training hours. But it's really kind
yeah.
of easy stuff to measure, and so therefore it makes for great policy, apparently.
Yeah, Paul, you make a great point asking the question, is it celebrating, tolerating, or is it accepting that things will inevitably go wrong and embracing the skill to undertake or master the reactive task like rescue? And I think there is a piece of that, right? There is a piece that says we have to be skilled to a level of competency to react when something does go wrong. You're absolutely right. But I think what the examples that Michael and I have seen is that when it goes beyond mastering the skill to celebrating the skill and elevating that above and beyond, and that becomes the mastering that skill becomes the focus rather than mastering the ability to prevent people from getting trapped in mines or making primary contact on a utility pole in the first place, right? So there's not a whole lot of focus, at least from what I saw in my experience in the utility world, of no, spend X number of hours a year training on preventing primary contacts. that X number of hours is focused on reacting to when somebody has made primary contact and trying to resuscitate them or lower them to the ground in an emergency. So I just think that there's a imbalance sometimes. And I think that's the point that Michael was saying, was that there's an imbalance in mastering the skill versus elevating that to the highest priority. And when we talk about risk management, and I think that this ties into human error, because Michael's example of the bow tie, right? So when we do a bow tie analysis of a critical event, you can only bow tie out based on the behaviors that you know about at the time you build the bow tie, right? And so if people are innovating and they've found a new procedure or a more efficient methodology of accomplishing that task, how do you build mitigations around that in the moment if you don't know about them? Because does that make sense? So if they're innovating and they're pushing the limits of and the boundaries of how they accomplish the task, and they haven't told you as an administrator of the risk controls that they're doing it a completely different way, then you can't build out a risk analysis of a procedure you know nothing about. And so if there is an error in accomplishing that procedure, you didn't have the ability to do a risk analysis on that. And so therefore you couldn't have built the controls in to protect them in that procedure. Does that make sense? And so I think that the answer to this, at least from my experience, and this is where I want to see industry and the world of HOP go, is understanding and knowing and having transparency to exactly what's happening in the moment, right? And right before work is about to commence, what controls do those people have in place? What is their strategy? How are they accomplishing that task today in the moment? Not necessarily what is our SOP or what is our MOP, that stuff's all well and good. But we all know that the SOP on Monday can read one way, but on Friday, the conditions are just different enough that the SOP that we were developed on Monday doesn't apply on Friday. And so if we don't have transparency to exactly how our people are going to be accomplishing that task on Friday, then we can't help them build mitigation controls to the risks that they're exposing themselves to. And that, I think, is where the human error conversation typically is gone, is we look at Friday's procedure and Monday's SOP or Friday's actions and Monday's SOP, and we say, look, they made a mistake because they didn't follow Monday's SOP. Well, we need to update Monday's SOP, and we need to refresh it and get a better SOP. Well, guess what? Next Friday, the conditions are going to be just different enough that the new SOP doesn't apply again, right? And so in my experience, it's giving those people on the front line the tools to say, okay, when you have to build a new procedure, when you have to go accomplish a task, how do you, as a frontline person, assess the risks, build mitigations, give transparency to the environment and the tools you have and the work you're about to execute back to the organization so the organization can grow and learn from your innovation on the front line.
So
And
that's
RJ,
a huge part of the challenge. I'm sorry, Michael, I didn't mean to step on you.
No, not at all.
That's the huge part of the challenge, right?
Yeah.
So you take up, you're out there, you're actively engaging, and you're having that communication going back and forth about real-time activities, right?
Yeah.
And trying to go back and then you have your executive leadership or your leadership team in an organization is like, well, hey, here's the SOP. We're not following the SOP.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So this is where, as a safety professional, this is one of the things that I have to do on a regular basis. Right.
Yeah.
I have to bridge that gap from the operational activities that are happening in the field real time. Right. And when the efficiency or the effectiveness of the work that's being conducted doesn't meet the standards of the organization, okay,
Yeah.
then that's that gap that I have to bridge professionally.
Yeah.
Right. And offer the explanation as to, hey, look, we got to take a couple extra minutes here to slow down, think the task through, come up with a viable solution, implement it, execute, and then debrief, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
So trying to explain that, and that's where that communication and that messaging gap, is, it really handcuffs you professionally, and it can handcuff the organization, right? Because there's execution expectations that are here from a leadership level, but in reality, the execution is probably the execution is actually held to a higher standard, because now you have multiple people coming in and building safety into it, understanding the task at hand, the procedures that we do. Now, some of those things are governed by regulatory agencies, right? In order to maintain your compliance, with your regulatory agencies. But there's things that just because you're in compliance doesn't mean you're safe. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, my personal story is a direct result about that. I'm not going to get into it, but when you go and do things and you meet the standards of the regulatory criteria, and people still get injured, you have to stop. I mean, that's where you have to stop and talk and have the conversations. And I see this happen all the time. I have a very broad circle of professionals that I talk with on a regular basis here in Cincinnati, and that's the issue that they struggle with all the time, right? Is bridging that gap and actually standing your ground and stepping up and saying, hey, whoa, look, leadership, we got to slow this down a little bit. We got to take this into consideration. And there's all kinds of tools and things that we utilize, as professionals every single day. And when you start discussing those type of things, a lot of leaders, their eyes roll back in their head, right?
Yeah.
Because it takes time. It takes time. But as professionals, and this is the neat thing about it is when you can get your leadership and your management to start looking at the human aspect of things, right?
Yeah.
How error occurs, how we can be more efficient in the way that we rebound from those errors, right? When they start to see that benefit is when their thinking and the way that they approach things changes. And that took me, for example, that took me about 6 months to change the mindset of my CEO. Who's very production orientated, and now unfortunately, there's other people involved in the organization that I'm still working on, but now when you, no, I'm starting to ramble, but it's very crucial. You got to have that communication at the field level, and you got to stand your ground when it comes to. I mean, you're protecting not only the individual, you're protecting the organization.
It's reputational risk, it's plant risk, right? It's company risk, it's people risk, public risk, right? There's risk.
I work in the chemical industry, so if something goes wrong in my facility, I could affect people that are living 3 to 5 miles downstream, downwind. Right. And that's a huge risk that I have to take into consideration every single day. Right.
Yeah.
So we have to have those conversations at the field level and allow the safety professional to do their job and be the subject matter expert and bringing that back into the leadership and trying to get them to understand and realize that we got to slow down. Human factors are a huge thing, and we got to. It goes back, like I said, learning teams, collaboration, all the things that are the fundamentals to HOP.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a question? Just
absolutely.
Going back to the original thing that you've got this thing, this task that you've got an SOP for, but it changes, the conditions change enough that it doesn't, you're having to update it. Why have you got an SOP for it in the first place? Would you not have?
Because it's a critical task that's been identified that needs an SOP because the result of improper execution is
absolutely. But
too
have you
much
not
risk.
got competent people who are doing it?
Yeah, so I think Anna, you're operating under your question rather is based in the assumption that the plant, the environment, the people are in the exact same condition as the moment that SOP was written.
Yeah, which is why I'm just saying, if the conditions are changing that much, that the SOP that you write on Monday is invalid when it comes to the task being done on Friday.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. Well, clearly it's not the same task that you wrote the SOP for.
Well, I'm not saying that it's necessarily a different task, but every single incident that we ever read about in a case study, right, has context associated with it, right?
Absolutely.
And so the context is this, and this. And so what I'm saying is the contextual conditions have changed. So between Monday and Friday. And I'm not saying that this is, every single SOP ever written is as such. But what I'm saying is that whenever I hear or see or study a case study, right, the conditions had changed between Monday and Friday.
It's always a change there. So that's why
Always
I'm sort of saying, would it not be a better way of working to have a series of rules to say, you do not do this, if it's these conditions, you do not, I don't know, high winds, you don't go up a ladder. Just bringing it back to simplicity. And then you have competent people, trained people who know what they're looking for and how to do things and how to, so an electrician, for example, an electrician, they know the risks. Yeah, if they're not sure, they bring the safety professional in. But if the conditions are changing that much that you're expecting the SOP to have to rewrite the SOP each time, why have you got an SOP? Why don't you just do a dynamic risk assessment for it?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what I'm advocating for a little bit, right? Is train your people in how to do dynamic risk assessments instead of assuming that their behaviors are going to stay constant, right? And so and my experience really is from the utility world where we had 0 SOPs, right? The only SOPs we had really was when we went into a substation and we had to do switching procedures. But even those switching procedures were written on a per case basis. So there was no book of switching procedures. It was, okay, this is the switching I want to do. And so that switching procedure was built for that specific procedure. But if I was going to send guys out to replace a 3-phase pole, there's no procedure for that. Because the environment's so dynamic and different pole to pole to pole. And so that is the shift I think that I'm advocating for is if we can build systems that give transparency to the factors that those people are facing the moment before they actually do the work. We can assess the risk exposure as an organization. Then we can say yay or nay. Okay, is this risk exposure acceptable or not? If it's not acceptable, then okay, what additional mitigations need to be put in place that say, okay, we're going to mitigate this risk factor, and this risk factor, and then you can proceed. That I think if we can build a system that's dynamic enough to do that in real time, then you have a really robust system that is taking into account human error, that's taking into account innovation and adaptation, and we're allowing humans to be humans in their work, but we're not handcuffing them by saying, no, you can only behave this way when doing this task. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really interesting, RJ, because I'm just sat here and my mind is going nuts with all the information, all the things that I wish I knew and that I could say now. But we're so regulated, certainly from my background in nuclear, and even in logistics, you've got all the transport issues there. Sorry, someone's messaging me and now I'm distracted. That's my problem. The regulator requires you to have a standard operating procedure sometimes. So the idea that you can say, right, this is how you turn that screw to release this pump and update that filter is great. But actually, like you say, the dynamic part of that is actually today, draw me a picture of where that machine is and what's next to it. And is any of that about to blow? Or, is it going to be some rubble? Is it going to be light or dark? And what we need for jobs is TripAdvisor and feedback. You need some sort of, right, who's the last guy that did this? Let's see what he said. And he might say, oh, it's a job you have to do down on the floor. It's not one that you can do at eye level or at waist level. It's on the floor. You need to take a mat or you're going to be lying in a puddle. And it's almost too much. It's too much in one go. And I posted something on LinkedIn today about heat procedures. So when it's hot, there was a post about a guy working in Memphis who died, literally dropped dead in front of his colleagues from what's likely to be heat exhaustion. And there was no policy for letting workers do less, letting workers take more breaks. And I've advocated in that post, if you haven't got a policy, get one. But that policy might then be a problem later on when it gets hotter, or your idea of hot, my idea of hot, two different things. So I'm full of wonder about what's right and what's wrong, and I think we need to have a SOP, a standard operating procedure for understanding risk exposure. That's what we need.
And it's going to be hard to scale, right? So one of the things that Paradigm is working on is a piece of software that hopefully will scale this concept, right? Of, okay, what is happening on the front line right before work is happening? And then what is the possible consequence of something going wrong in that scenario? And is that too high of a risk exposure? Is that an acceptable risk exposure? As an organization, an organization makes that decision. And then if it's too high, there's feedback loops, right? And like to Donald's point, at the end of the job, it's, the process is basically, okay, assess the risk, execute the task after we've applied mitigations, and then assess the task, right? Do a post-job debrief, something like that. And if we don't innovate in this manner of trying to get transparency to what's happening, like you said, on the front line, and giving feedback to the next guy that has to do the task to make sure he brings his mat so he's not, laying on the cold, wet floor, then we're going to be having these conversations about, the SOP and didn't follow the correct step and didn't this and didn't that, and we're going to have this work as imagined versus work as done conversation into perpetuity, because human nature is never going to change. We're always going to be innovating, we're always going to be adapting, and we're always going to be exposing ourselves to making mistakes and error. Anna, go ahead.
Okay, well, I work for a fairly small company, but our maintenance department have some software, and every time that they do any work on any machine, especially if they have to, if it's not something new and they've had to work it out, they always put like a little report. It's only fairly short, but with stuff like this in it, say, I really struggled with this, and this, or I have this issue, and this is how I resolved it.
Yeah.
So
and it's built in. Sorry, Anna.
So that next time, you know, when they come to do it, they can look back at, oh yeah, that was that, you know, I needed this.
Yeah. Building in that OpEx and that feedback of experience.
And the time to do it, giving people the time to do it, so they're not hopping on to the next job. And forget what the nuances were of that job that day.
Yeah, but then that's made such a difference to them that they actually want to do it.
Yeah. I worked with one company, small construction company, in their HOP implementation, and that's one of the very first things that we did was install, like Barbara said, these after action reports. It is okay. At the end of every day, we're going to have debriefs about how the day went, what went right, and what's needed for tomorrow to set us up for success. All right, and they, started seeing their mornings were more consistent. There was less emergencies, right? And so it has this trickle down effect in operations and operational efficiency. So absolutely, I think the after action review or after action report is a great way to prevent future mistakes and future errors.
I think
Donald, you're off. Do you have something, man?
Yeah. So there's a couple. There's one thing, like for example, what you were just talking about with the after action reports, right? Debriefs. We're taught to do the plan, act, do, right? Plan, act, do. But what we seem to forget a lot of times is that last portion of that plan, act, do circle, and that's the evaluate, right? I don't even like to use the word evaluate, because we need to debrief. Evaluate it means you're going to make a judgment, right?
Yeah.
You're going to make a judgment, right? I don't like to use the word evaluate. Plan, act, do, debrief. That way, you're talking about the facts of what they happen in real time, and you have evidence to adjust your planning the next time you do it, right?
Yeah.
So I don't even like to use that evaluation part. I use a debrief or some type of different action word, to where I got to take a corrective action based upon the real time activities. And I kind of want to go back just a little bit, Claire, with what you were discussing a few minutes ago. One thing I had to remember is, as an organization, okay, when you're talking about regulators and regulatory compliance, right? In the United States, a lot of times, for example, our standard operating procedures are driven strictly out of our ISO certifications, more so than anything else. This is what we say we're going to do as an organization. So we have to have a document that goes into our ISO programs that governs us and into compliance with what we say we are going to do. Okay. I hate ISO. I can't stand it, right? Because it handcuffs you as an organization to be able to operate effectively and efficiently, right? Mm-hmm. So going back into what you were saying with the regulators, right? Here in the United States, for example, federal law dictates a basic threshold, the very base threshold of what you have to comply with from the law. Okay. If you want to, we'll use it from a not necessarily a political standpoint, but from a governmental standpoint. Your states and your municipalities, your county governments, your city governments have the opportunity to expand upon those laws to make them more stringent, right? Okay, so as an organization, how do we do that? Your program level documentation for what is the law is what your program documentation is. Your organization, the people that own my company, right? We have the right to say what our policies are.
Yeah.
Right. But we have to maintain that threshold, that regulatory threshold. We can expand upon that, right? And then you can expand upon your policy even further by developing and implementing procedures, whether it be standard operating procedures, work instructions, or things of that nature, right? But those documents are controlled by you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you should have the right in the means, as long as you're maintaining the compliance with the law, to expand or adjust, as long as you're maintaining the compliance, right? So it's up to the organization and how they approach. And it's all, and I hear this all the time. People say, and RJ, I think you'll kind of agree with me on this one. When people refer to a safety culture, there is no such thing as a safety culture. It's the culture of your organization, which is driven by the people that you have involved in your organization at that current moment in time, right?
Yeah.
It's a matter of building trust, building relationships, effective communication, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be able to implement or execute anything at any level unless you have those elements: trust, respect, understanding, collaboration, consistent messaging. You got to have all these elements, otherwise you're not going to, right? I can regulate things till I'm blue in the face, right?
Yeah.
But no work's going to get done, right? So I've worked with organizations that have taken it to that extreme in the construction industry, which is where you definitely don't want this stuff to happen.
Yeah.
Because the construction industry is so fluid, right?
Yeah.
That you put one component into place to eliminate a hazard, you may be creating 5 more or 10 more in the peripheral because of the one component that you put into place to resolve that specific hazard. So you got to have a fluid approach, right?
Absolutely.
And that's where it's crucial that you got to have that engagement activity with the people where the work is happening.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to kind of expand on that a little bit, Claire. I'm sorry for getting
No, it's fine. And again, you've got me thinking. I love these conversations. The ISO standards have become such a thing that certainly in my last role, you couldn't get insurance for your business unless you could meet these 9001, 14001, and there's more standards coming in all the time that you have to meet. But it's up to you how you meet them. You don't have to make it very hard. There's an ISO standard. You meet it a particular way, and you just do it.
Yeah.
Worst thing is you say you're going to do it, then you don't do it. But you can set your own standard, and it doesn't have to be a very high bar. But what's really frustrating then is all you have to do, all you're demonstrating by having an ISO standard is that you've got time to maintain an ISO standard. And I don't speak from experience. We used to have meeting after meeting after meeting to set the scene for the auditor. They weren't necessarily seeing what was real. They were seeing everything that we prepared that might look real. It's crazy.
I must do it. So I do the 9001, 14001. And the new ones that have come out, I understand they're being rejigged again. The new ones that have come out, there's very little in there that if you're running a good business, you shouldn't be doing anyway. And that's one of the things. I mean, I hate saying, "Oh yeah, we've got to do it because the standard says so."
Yes,
that's my pet hate. There's a couple of little bits. But as a general rule, if it's in the standard, you should be doing it as a good business. You should be doing it anyway. And if you don't need to, for example, we don't design anything. So you just don't do it. But one of the things I did at my previous company was for all of the operatives, I did a quality sort of 101 training thing. And it comes back into this. I didn't really think about it in terms of health and safety at the time, but I probably could have added that in, because what I did was I took them through the plan, do, check, act cycle. And everyone on the shop floor, sooner or later, was going to drill a hole in some way, shape, or form. They were going to do it. So I took them through that on drilling a hole. And there was, when it came down to it, there was actually so much to it. You know, am I doing it in the right place? Have I got the right bit? Is there something behind there that it's going to affect? And we took them right the way through that cycle. And doing the study, like you say, you know, evaluate. I would say study rather than check being that. But they all stood back and went, wow, never even thought of that. So I just got them to think critically about what they were doing using that. And
yeah,
there was going to be a safety element to that anyway, but it just got everybody thinking about what they were doing a bit more.
yeah, absolutely. It's about engaging folks, and you know how they're going to do the work. What mitigations are we going to put in place in case we fail or make a mistake, and then how are we going to share what we learned? Right? It's a yeah, it's a simple process, but it's not an easy process to implement, right? Because it goes back to what Donald was saying, right? It's a culture thing, right? You have to build a culture where feedback is welcome. It's okay to fail. It's okay to make mistakes. And it's okay to share that stuff. And nobody's going to get fired for doing something wrong. That I think is a huge piece of this. But we are 10 minutes out from 9:30, Claire. So
or
want
16:30 in the UK.
It's 9:20 a.m. here in Mountain Time. So
it's about time for a pint in the UK.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, but it's only Thursday, so a pint of tea or coffee.
That'll keep you awake.
I want to thank you, everybody. I'm sorry that there weren't more people, and we'll look into why that is. I think we've got a few. Well, Anna pointed out to me that we might have a technical issue with the reminder system, so we'll go back and have a look at that. Nevertheless, it's been a great discussion. I want to tell you a couple of things. Our guest next month is Joe Esty. Some of you will be familiar with Joe. And now I'm looking for the piece of paper that I've written down with what I can tell you about Joe. Never mind, look him up. Joe's going to join us next month. He's a lot of fun, and he's really experienced, and he loves this stuff. And RJ,
I've got to tell a real quick Joe Esty story. So I met Joe Esty a couple months ago for the first time, and we started talking, and he was talking about having worked, or no, I was talking to him about how my grandfather worked at a Hanford nuclear fuel storage site when I was growing up and I was a kid. And he said, oh yeah, I used to work out at Hanford. When was he there? And I was like, oh, I don't know, late 90s, blah, blah, blah. He said, oh, really? I was there during that time. He said, what was his name? And I said, his name was Harlan Pearson. And he said, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? When I first started out there, Harlan was my lead guy out at Hanford. And so Joe Esty and my grandfather worked together, like 30 years ago. And Joe and I just met for the first time. So super cool dude. Joe is one of the great guys in the hop world. So we love having Joe on.
Yeah. And he told me that story after you told it me, actually, RJ. He told me that story, and he was really excited. that
Yeah.
that has happened in both of your lives, that you'd
Yeah.
somehow found each other, even though
Yeah.
you'd had nothing to do with each other before. Yeah. He
Yeah.
was a lot of fun. I've spent quite a lot of time with him recently, virtually, and yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to tell you was, oh, Helen's just put a link on.
Sorry, I didn't realise I was messaging you, Claire. I thought I was messaging everybody.
You were.
You did. You messaged everybody.
Yeah, sorry. The first time I messaged Claire, and she's like,
Oh, gotcha.
you sending it to me.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah. I don't know if you saw, if anybody is interested, all I was going to point out that RJ is running a hazard recognition course 21st of September. It's online.
Yeah.
So if any of you guys are interested in that, I just
And
put the link.
and I will preface this that hazard recognition course is designed for those frontline leaders, right? Your foremen, your frontline supervisors, to help them kind of understand human error, how human error works, how human decision making works on job sites, so they can really kind of take some of these concepts we talked about today and have some real world solutions for mitigating the hazard that is the human on the job site.
Yeah. And the other course that we have available now is on our Paradigm website, a link to an introduction to HOP. And it's e-learning, so you can do it at a pace that suits you. It's mobile friendly. And I think we're the first people to bring this to market. So, I don't think you'll find it anywhere else. But it's on our website, and we'll be putting it on the socials over the coming days. It's really good value, and you should definitely do it. The people in the room maybe don't need to do it, but talk to your colleagues about it. See if they want to make an investment of a relatively small amount of money to understand the stuff that we're talking about here today.
Yeah.
I guess, does anybody have any questions? We've got a few minutes left.
Claire, I was just going to end with 3 tips that I have used and I've seen success from. The first one is assume that human error is going to happen on your next job, right? And build an organization that assumes human error is going to happen, or start working towards building an organization and systems. And number 2 is build pre-job brief structure that discusses human error as part of preparing for the job. If your pre-job briefs aren't discussing human error and how to mitigate its effects, then you're shortchanging your folks on the front line. And the third one is encourage leaders to start looking for error likely situations every day in the scenarios and in the work jobs that they put their people in. And those 3 things I think would really start churning an organization towards understanding and mitigating human error.
Yeah, they're great. Sorry, I'm just writing them down so that I don't forget them later. I'm going to tell my husband about all this later, and then we'll have discussions about human error and whether it's his fault or mine. Because blame fixes nothing. Well, so much for that. We have recorded the session. We will be posting it onto YouTube so that you can watch it again, see how glamorous I am, and you can share it with your colleagues and friends and your safety people. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank you, RJ.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
For a chat, they can. I'm just going to stop recording, and then we can stay for a chat if you want to.